My humble beginnings are I'm from Kuujjuaq, which is the northern part of Quebec, traveling only by dog team the first 10 years of my life. Didn't know any English till I was 6. And so you can appreciate the space, the time in which we as Inuit have come from that very traditional way of life to what we're living today, where most societies have probably taken about 350 years to adjust to this, what we call the modern world. For us, it has been in one lifetime. And yes, the dramatic changes that have happened have contributed, of course, to the challenges that we face today. However, it's the oppressive policies of the past that have really done us in the worst of ways. And that happens in every respect. We are a people. Most people don't understand this, but we are a remarkably ingenious, adaptable peoples. We've had to be living in the cold, the ice and snow. I mean, we are the inventors of a home built out of snow, warm enough to have our babies in it. So, there's nothing stupid about that. This is a very ingenious culture. We are the inventors of the haya, which is replicated worldwide as the most remarkable engineered boat in the world. We are a people who know a lot about sustainability and about our environment and our climate and know how to live, not just live, but we can thrive in settings where most people would perish in 1 hour. And so what you see today in terms of the problems that we face at the social, health, education, cultural, spiritual level is not the essence of who we are. It is a result of all of these bad policies that have happened along the way that has now created the violence, the abuses, the addictions, the high suicide rates, the poor housing that exists up there. Is just, you can't believe what's happening in our own country. And so we have to start to think very differently about how we deal with Aboriginal issues, because if you had what we had in terms of the constant state of emergency, not every other week, but every single day, you would know that it would have a very tough psychological impact on your families and your communities. And that is what is happening today. And so the policies starts with the attitudes that have to change. The attitudes towards Indigenous peoples as victims to everything that has happened, even in my lifetime. Our approaches to one another have to change. So all of the changes that need to be reflective in policies that work needs to happen here in this room as individuals. And we can't be thinking just individualistically either, though. There is the collective that we have to think about, not just in terms of what the Arctic is happening to its people, but what's happening to its environment. An environment and climate that we rely upon to survive and thrive. The ice is our life force. And now it's starting to go as a result of policies around the world, not just in our own country. For so long, we were the laggards. There was a time when we worked together very closely with the Canadian government as Inuit NGOs. For example, one of the great successes that Mel didn't mention was the Persistent Organic Pollutants Stockholm Convention Treaty, that Indigenous peoples of the world, of the northern parts of the countries and Canadian government worked together to change the whole idea and to move towards a very strong treaty that eliminated at their source these toxins that ended up in the food chain of Inuit. But along the way, these toxins that would go up also helped every single one of you have cleaner food, free of toxins, as we protected our own food source. We can, and we are not just paralyzed people up there who have nothing to contribute and who are just costing a lot of money to the rest of the country. But we are people who want to contribute, who can contribute, who understand sustainability, who understand what it's like to live in a harsh environment, and we have much to teach the rest of the country and the world on how to do things better, not just for our environment, for so many other other ways in which we can be contributors to this country. So, pardon me. So indeed, I think we have to think in terms of understanding what that history is about, the historical traumas that have happened in our past, and how that's acting out in ways today that is costing our country a lot of money, and it's costing many lives in our community. I'm very, very freshly raw from burying my nephew 4 days ago, and that's not the first. It is happening in every one of our families, and many of us, you may say, accomplished people, successful, and they're making it. But you know what? Many of our family members are not. And as Canadians, we really have to start thinking in terms of policy schools that are really going to incorporate those histories and incorporate how the Aboriginal communities can become the defenders, not just of our environment as it relates to the rest of the planet, but our environment in terms of how we as Canadians can create eco-friendly businesses, not starting in the Arctic even, you know? Start in the Arctic where people are most impacted by that. And we, because we are there, we can emulate what that could look like for the rest of Canada as well, because we're in such a harsh environment that is needing to have economies that work. Don't just dangle that one carrot in front of us with mining and oil and gas, which is going to spew even more CO2s, which is the source and the problem of what we're facing with the melting of the Arctic. Think much more creatively and innovatively in terms of how we can work together by protecting that Arctic, as I've always said for many years now. Thank you. I'm off script anyway. Yeah. So, you know, think in terms of the innovative ways in which we can work together by tapping into the ingenuity of the Aboriginal peoples of this country. And I think that's where we need to start, is how is it that people have survived in those harshest of environments? It's with a great deal of ingenuity and brilliance and intelligence and wisdom, which has been learnt from working and directly living in that kind of harsh environment. So for me, start there. And don't forget that we are wanting to contribute to a better Canada. And it means nothing to our Prime Minister, who can talk about these things at the UN level. And he has such potential, but I think he's caught up in the culture of politics. But and that's what happens so often in politics, is it's no better if he can say those things but not do anything about it in our own country. And it's no better if he's got bringing about that optimistic Canadian energy to the world, but not if our kids are still taking their own lives up in the north in the way that they are, and not if they're not getting the right education that they need to be able to move forward and beyond and start to break down those statistics of abuse and violence and suicides and poverty. And to think that 2 years ago, there was a report that came out that said Inuit of the North were the hungriest in this country. Imagine that in our own country. This is what's happening up in our communities. And I bring you that raw human face to these issues with not a lot of solutions, but even just becoming aware of it as Canadians, and especially a public policy school has such potential to start to bring in that part of the Canadian reality.